A note of thanks and perhaps a note of amusement. Thank you to Cranfield University for the opportunity, particularly to Gareth, to come and talk to you today a little bit about the supply chain, specifically here at Cranfield, but actually more generally. And the point of amusement for me is that one day my kids will be told that their father was asked to present at Cranfield School of Management. So I'm very delighted and honoured to be here. In any case, moving on. I have 18 slides for those of you who are counting. It's mostly pictures, and then right at the end there's a little 2-minute video which describes a little more about what we do in colour and movement. And also, as you know, there's a visit to the Biomass Boiler after lunch, and we have a driver here with an Arctic that's going to do a sort of staged delivery so that everybody gets a chance to see how it works. And we can talk through and have a discussion about any particular questions you might have there, and then if you don't ask any questions at the end of this. So who are we? Who am I? My name's Mark Lebus. The company is LC Energy. We're specialists in supply of energy from biomass in particular, and our business was founded 2007, early part of 2007, so we're coming up for 10 years. There was mentioned earlier a little bit about the UK marketplace, and I think when we started the business, it was probably only a few years old in the UK. It's been very mature and established in Europe, decades of use and practice and research and development, and probably about 15 years ago, I suspect, the UK market latched onto the fact that there's an opportunity to take over some of the fossil fuel challenges that we have in the marketplace today. Back in end of 2013, beginning of 2014, we tendered for the contract through the process that was described earlier, and it was an ODU process. It took quite a while to get through the due diligence process as far as Cranfield were concerned, and then we went into quite a sort of lengthy testing and commissioning procedure. So to date, since the beginning of our commissioning, we've actually supplied just about 1,500 tons of wood chip to the system here up until the beginning of April. What is it that we do? I'm going to do a little bit of background on us as well. We have what we call an integrated biomass service. The origins of the business very much started with logistics of fuel supply, moving really what is essentially a rural activity, which is forestry, production of wood chip, movement of timber, into what we classify really as a secure supply of energy. And by virtue of that, is that me, do you think? I shall do that, excuse me. By virtue of taking on the supply chain, this is where we felt we had our expertise to bring to the table. We've built a business largely around fuel supply, which has now integrated a more complete end-to-end solution. So we look after bulk fuel. There's some images up on the screen. You'll see of wood chip, and we also distribute and deliver wood pellets. It's another type of bulk fuel. And we have an online service which sells fuel on mail order by the ton, by smaller bags. More recently, we've got involved in engineering of the systems, partly through frustration that there aren't enough good engineers around, and we felt that we could bring some value to the supply chain. But more importantly, once the systems are in, they really have to be looked after. And this has been mentioned a few times by some of the speakers previously. And we felt that as part of our service, particularly the after-sales service, the company was very well positioned as we turn up frequently every week or virtually every day in some cases to be in a position to provide services, vertically integrated services. And we look after systems now, and we maintain them, and we clean them, and we repair them if necessary. And part of that is because we think that that's the best thing for the industry, and part of it because the longer we keep the boilers running, the more fuel we can sell the customer. So it's a well thought through strategy, and it has increased a big part of our business very quickly. Just some background, really. This is a couple of slides really about who's out there and who's doing it. Some of you will be very familiar with this if you're in the industry anyway. But there's a very broad range of customers. But essentially, the most important thing to understand is that customers really, with a steady heat load or a higher heat load, are much more likely to have success with biomass. It's a solid fuel heating system, and as such, it's much better at a steady state than a kind of on-off that you might get out of a fossil fuel system. So it's very relevant to bigger district heating networks. Those have got a high heat load in particular, and Cranfield here, I'm delighted to say, is one of 5 universities on our client list who have adopted and endorsed the biomass systems. A quick flick through to some of the other customers. There's some overlap here with our friends from Flowgas, of course, and you can see a number of other customers and industries there, but it gives you just a broad flavor of some of the types of sectors that are really interested and have gone down this particular route and are customers of ours. Very locally to us here, 8.3 miles away, is the new Centre Parks, or the new Centre Parks from a few years ago, Woburn, who are also a customer, have quite a similar Arctic-delivered wood chip system in place, albeit that it's a subterranean system. Just to give you some background in terms of who's out there. A little bit of science. I put this up here because I think it also reflects the objectives of our client here. I mean, mostly customers have 2 or 3 key objectives when they're going down the decision process for looking at biomass. For us, and particularly for Cranfield, the reduction of their carbon footprint, and particularly by reducing by 50% by the year 2020, was very high on the agenda as far as Cranfield were concerned. And this just gives you a little bit of a schematic or drawing as to why biomass, particularly in terms of CO2, has a much, much lower output than the normal or traditional fossil fuels. The other thing I've got up there, obviously, is the price of fuels. That is a few years out of date, or even a year, or even 6 months out of date. It will look out of date given the fluctuation in the oil price and certainly some of the gas prices. But the key things for us in terms of people making decisions about this start with the price and the payback. So it's all about the commercial, the economics. And second order to that, more often than not, is the environmental push. I'm delighted to hear this morning that it sounds to me like the environmental push was probably on a level peg with the financials. So that just gives you a little bit of an understanding about what typically customers are looking for. This is the other thing. I won't go into detail. Thankfully, our friend from Flowgas here has given you the full background. But the RHI for this sector has really been game-changing for the whole industry. It's pump-primed the sector to allow a more consistent approach to funding to support the capital investment in the infrastructure for putting in a biomass system. The reason I've got it up here is that although there is likely to be a push towards bigger systems in the future, again, this was mentioned a little earlier about the RHI2, as we put it up here, towards larger district heating systems, because the way the incentive scheme tariff may well be set. The critical thing from a fuel supplier's perspective is this thing that says BSL. It stands for Biomass Suppliers List. From October the 5th last year, it was mandatory for anybody drawing the RHI to provide or buy their supply from a supplier who had BSL accredited fuel supply. And the biomass supplier list is only interested in the sourcing of the timber itself. It's not a quality accreditation. It's simply to say that the timber has been bought legally and sustainably. And in order for that to happen, we have to demonstrate a complete audit trail of sustainability right back to source. So all of our sourcing of wood and timber, and there'll be a bit more detail in a minute, to show you, has to be done through a complete auditable process. And that's absolutely mandatory now in order for you to get the RHI. So on our invoices to Gareth and the team here, each invoice will have a unique BSL number stamped on that invoice to ensure that when they go and claim the RHI, that there's an audit trail for them to demonstrate that the timber's come from the right source. So what do we do? Kind of everything. It sounds like we're kind of a jack of all trades on this. As I said earlier, we have a particular interest and expertise in the supply chain of the fuel. And we start right from the beginning, which is to encourage our customers to go down the process of engaging in tree planting. And the picture you can see on the slide behind me is executives from Heathrow Airport engaging 10 days ago, actually, in their third round of tree planting up in an estate near Reading. I brought this with me, not just because I assumed you'd know what a tree looked like, but these are saplings bought out of, grown in Scotland, and we normally, particularly at Christmas time, tend to give these out because they will grow into Christmas trees. Please help yourself to one as you go out. If you haven't already, there's a table full of these. I don't want to take them home in the car, if you don't mind, but you're very welcome to take one of these away. And in theory, once you've planted them and looked after them correctly, they should grow about a foot a year. Eventually, you'll be able to hang a bauble or two on them. So just coming back to what we do, we focus very closely in on the supply chain in terms of where it comes from and how it's harvested, who's harvesting it, and the paper trail behind that. Our particular part of this supply chain is everything from tree planting right through to the cleaning and maintenance of the boiler system. So in going round in the circle, you'll see on the top right corner we've got harvesting machines that will go into the woodlands under a management plan. It's stored and stacked and taken to the local yard, one of our depots. It's then processed into wood chip. In this case, for Cranfield, that's a picture at the bottom of the Cranfield depot that you're about to have a look at if you come on the tour afterwards. And to the left of that, obviously, this top loader system and the boiler above it as well. So for us, in terms of what we embark upon, we offer the complete service end-to-end in terms of biomass solutions. So this is where we are here today. I think, I'm delighted to say it's a slightly better day than when we took the photos. A grey old day it was too. This is just a kind of snapshot of the vehicle moving into place at the fuel store just around the corner, a couple of minutes walk away, and you'll get to see all of that in action in a few minutes anyway. Just some detail, because I think the most important thing for anyone to ask questions while we're there, that's absolutely fine, because when you see it and you've got something tangible to digest, it's probably easier to ask a question at that point in any case. But I'll just give you a little bit of background on how this works. So it was mentioned earlier, I think possibly by Steve, in terms of the design of the fuel store. When we tendered for the contract, we were also asked at that point to provide best advice on the practice of delivering fuel into the fuel pit to see whether we had any thoughts and ideas about turning circles and the way to get the vehicle in and how much space is required. And it just about works, and I'm delighted to say that in terms of our provision of fuel and wood chip, it's working extremely well. When I say just about works, you'll see when you get there, the fuel pit itself is 1.2 lorries length, which means that there's only 0.2 left in the fuel store when the lorry turns up. Now, we can normally be pretty prescriptive about when a vehicle turns up, but we do have other aspects, including motorways and weather and things to consider as well. So we call it just-in-time delivery, and it requires quite a lot of precision between our operations team, and Lucy Clark here, head of operations, can give you a lot more detail on how that works, and the team on site here with Gareth and the guys in terms of when the next delivery is required. So there are quite a lot of detailed logistics and planning, and it's very dependent upon the usage of the chip here and how the demand is being used, what the ambient temperature might be, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a huge amount of coordination and cooperation between our supply chain and, of course, the customer site here. The delivery itself today will take a long time because we're going to do it as a staged event. Typically, it would take somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes, depending on whether everyone's ready to go when we arrive, and we turn up. We deliver. The delivery out of the back of a lorry, if it's a straight drop, is about 6 to 8 minutes in total. So the turnaround time from start to finish is anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes. So one thing that we've introduced more recently as well, which helps the system and helps the customer, helps our own audit trail and paperwork, is that we have our drivers now fully automated on electronic delivery systems. So when they turn up, they have their iPads, the delivery notes are prepared, the customer squiggles the iPad with his finger, and the delivery note gets emailed immediately. The delivery is finished straight through to the customer and through to our operations department as well. So we're introducing some innovation in order to make sure that the customer gets best practice and best service. More at the delivery site. More questions, I'm sure. Okay, so some of the background in terms of what we do about our sourcing. You've got two pictures on your screen, and we operate what we call a sort of hub and satellite approach to our fuel delivery. As a business, we run 7 depots across southern England. You'll see there's a bit more than that on the bottom left screen, but these are what we call our spheres of influence or spheres of delivery, and it looks like a rather drunk Olympic ring layout. But what it means is that we source our timber stock and we send our fuel out to customers normally within 30 miles of the customer. And therefore, each hub itself can create a linked service between the areas. It is, as I say, rather a drunk Olympic ring format, but I think you can get the gist of it. There's quite a lot of overlap in the centres, and the importance for us on that is that we have resilience for supply. So the customer gets security of supply, because we know if one particular depot goes out of action, and I could suggest that something like foot and mouth might make us go out of action and we're closed down for one area, another area adjacent will give us that resilience as well. And the important thing for the customer to know is that firstly, the source of the material is local, and secondly, that there is resilience or backup in terms of supply chain as well. In each of our depots, we would normally hold anything up to 12 months worth of stock for a particular customer. That poses some interesting challenges for us in a sense that we have to try and guess what the customer is going to use. We have to try and guess what the ambient temperature is going to be over the course of the year ahead. And therefore, we have to make sure that we have a sufficient amount of stock on the ground curing to allow us to ensure that we never run out. This is a kind of follow-on to the discussion a bit about the BSL accreditation. Just a little bit about the timber itself, because I think I haven't spent any time describing the wood. We only supply virgin wood, 100% virgin wood in our supply chains. That's for chip and, of course, for pellet as well. But in terms of producing our own wood chip, all of our timber is 100% virgin. It's predominantly or almost entirely softwood as well. It's the kind of lower value end of the wood market. But just for clarification, to avoid doubt, all of our wood fuel is supplied under the BSL license. Mentioned tree planting earlier. We can go into a bit more detail about that later. But typically, management plans, when they're doing clear fell of woodland, will always have a follow-up plan in terms of what's going to happen to the land afterwards. Typically, that's replanting. Sometimes it's a little bit of heathland reclamation, but there's always a management plan behind everything that we're harvesting as well. Something about the tree. I often get asked this, so I put the slide in more recently just to explain a little bit about the tree. It's a very simple and very generic schematic or drawing picture of how what the value is in the tree. Trees and woodlands have always been a crop. For generations, for centuries, has always been a crop. And the highest value end of that crop is the stuff that goes to the sawmills. And that's the straight stuff without the knots and the branches and the imperfections. And that warrants the highest value if it's straight and long and clean and pure in terms of the way it comes off the sawmill. So in any tree, if they're doing a clear fell, the lowest part of it is normally the biggest, straightest part, and that's the bit that goes to the sawmills. The middle bit will be lesser value because there'll be slightly shorter, straighter bits, maybe a bit of imperfection, and so there'll be bars and fencing. And the top end of the wood of the tree is normally the lowest value, which typically either was left on the ground or was used for pulp, the pulp industry, something like that. So we end up with, let's say, 20% of a tree and no more in a harvest. So if somebody's felling 1,000 tons, we might get that 200 tons into the wood chip supply chain, and the rest of it will end up going through to higher value marketplaces. So just the reason I put this up is it's quite important, and I'm going to get on to the message about is there enough wood and et cetera, that this is actually part of a process. We sometimes get what's called thinnings, which is, say, after a 7-year cycle, the runt of the forest that's been planted will end up as a thinnings and will end up in the wood chip marketplace because it has very little value elsewhere. Moving on, is there enough wood? I love this picture. It's kind of mind-blowing, really. This is the result of an ice storm in Sweden. And although in the UK, approximately 20 million tons grows each year in terms of our wood stock, may I ask you to suggest how much timber there is lying on that ground? I'll tell you, don't need to answer that. It's 1 million tons. And out of the 20 million tons, only about 17% ever goes into the wood fuel marketplace. I have another question for you, which rhetorical maybe. Would anyone like to hazard a guess as to how long it takes annually, or how long it takes for the annual wood fuel harvest to regrow each period? Do you understand the question? For the UK marketplace, it takes 1.3 months to regrow the annual wood fuel harvest. Yeah. Yeah. So it's, is there enough wood? Cripes, yes. The challenge is going to be harvesting it, making it cost effective, finding the right management plans, making sure that woodlands are brought back into management. Over half the woodlands in the country are not being managed, and that's just by virtue of the lack of interest or value or inconvenience, or some of the estates are just used for shooting and people don't want to change their estates, etc. But there is a lot of wood around, and we are very underutilising what's available to us so far. A little bit about woodland management as well. We sort of briefly talked about this earlier. This is just a bit of a description about tree planting, moving through to the management of woodlands. It's an absolutely vital an essential part of the process in order to enhance and protect and develop and grow our woodlands. Woodland management does mean harvesting, and that's the point I wanted to make in this particular one here. Top left is a picture of a gang replanting an estate of ash, and in the middle is Windsor Castle. There's a replanting of some softwoods going on there as well. It's just to give you a flavour of the importance of making sure that woodland management is instrumental in part of the supply chain. Other benefits just to consider. The one point on this slide that I want to raise is jobs. The UK market for biomass has introduced somewhere between 16 and 17,000 new jobs since certainly up to the end of 2015. So it's a significant increase in new business opportunities for jobs, employment across the UK. The one thing to note is that does not include securing jobs for those that have less work to do, particularly through the winter months. The busy period for us is from, say, October through to April. It's the coldest part of the year normally, mostly, sometimes. And that's when we're busiest, and often when agricultural contractors and farmers are less busy. So there's a lot of securing jobs for farmers where they know they can outsource their teams or their equipment or whatever in their less busy periods as well. I just wanted to bring this to your attention as well. This is Heathrow Airport, the Chartered Institute of Procurement. They won the best contribution to corporate responsibility. And the reason I put this up is that biomass, one of our biggest challenges in biomass is awareness, is an understanding of where or how does it exist, why should you do it. All the flavors that we're trying to answer today, colleagues from Flowgas and others, to convince people that actually there is a mature, stable marketplace here. What happened here in the Chartered Institute award ceremony is that Heathrow went up against NATO, the FA, and LOCOG, who at the time were pulling together the London 2012 bid, and beat them all to best contribution to corporate responsibility because of the biomass system they installed at Heathrow Airport. And that's important for us as a business, obviously. But just as a message, it says that actually outside in the big corporate sector, the biomass is also recognized as something that's a major contribution to corporate responsibility. Finally, I've got a little bit of video to come. I have no idea where I am in terms of timing. I've only got 2 more minutes to do. The important message that I think was mentioned just before the break about the RHI. The RHI exists and has existed for a number of years and has been instrumental in building this sector of ours. Don't hang around is what I would say. if you want and you're interested in it, get on and have a look. There will be changes. Again, this was mentioned before. We don't quite know how those changes are going to come about or what their end game is going to be. We've had some good steers from government as to which direction they'd like to take it, but don't wait. It's important if you're interested and you have an idea to do it, is not to hang around, is to make some decisions reasonably early on to at least get your concept and an understanding whether you're going to take that leap.